Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Russia. To be more precise, we're going to talk about St. Petersburg. Today, as a result of a terrorist attack, was killed one very famous man. Well, let's take a look at the Russian sources map. They have already added an icon of fire. This is the cafe that this person was killed. According to the first piece of information we received from the ground, the Russian sources are saying that that war correspondent Vladimir Tatarsky was killed. Very famous war correspondent Vladimir Tatarsky was killed in cafe as a result of terrorist attack. The Russian official policy authorities are saying that there are at least two versions of that terrorist attack. The first one is that this military correspondent was killed by the statuette that a woman brought inside the cafe. The second version is that the bomb was already got into this cafe before that evening started. And today this war correspondent was making some kind of held his creative evening in this cafe. And furthermore, some Russian sources are saying that this cafe used to belong to the Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, in the past. I'm not sure about whether this cafe belongs to him right today or not. But anyway, as you can see, this correspondent, this military war correspondent, had a lot of subscribers. He's very famous. He had his own channels. A lot of people was following him. Furthermore, he had a lot of connections, a lot of friends, and the top of Russian political authority and so on. So he was a very famous correspondent on the ground. And as we understand, as we know, he was killed as a result of terrorist attack. Furthermore, before we continue discussing this situation, I believe that we need to remember, or we need to remind ourselves about the other terrorist attack that took place on the territory of Russian Federation in the last year, or during this special military operation. If you remember, a year ago there was another terrorist attack, but not in St. Petersburg, but in Moscow. And as a result of that terrorist attack, a young woman, Dugina, was killed. And the Russians managed to discover and they made investigation, and they found the executor. He wasn't captured because it was a woman. It was the officer of Ukrainian Special Forces. They managed to leave Russia through the border with Estonia, and now she is somewhere in Europe and something like this. But this is, like, let's say, the second terrorist attack on the territory of Russian Federation. Of course, there were a lot of terrorist attack in Zaporozhye and Kherson area, and when the Russians were stepping back, retreating from Kherson area, for example, the ex-head of Kherson area was killed, or it was like a car accident, but maybe that was also the Ukrainian, maybe there was also some kind of Ukrainian step. Furthermore, during this special operation, lots of local authorities were killed as a result of Ukrainian terrorist attack with bombs and so on. But when talking about Russia, this is the second terrorist attack on the territory of Russian Federation. And the thing is that, for example, a year ago when Dugina was killed in Moscow, that terrorist attack took place on the 20th of August of 2022. We know that few days later, after that, the Ukrainians started their greatest counteroffensive operation in Kherson district, and later in Kharkiv area. So as you can see, the Ukrainians by previous terrorist attack was trying to create some kind of media atmosphere. They was trying to focus the Ukrainians and focus the world that they're doing some success, that they're doing some action, and they were trying to increase the spirit and power of their forces. And as we know, as a result of the previous counteroffensive operation of the Ukrainian side, the Russians were forced to step back from Kherson area, the Russians were forced to step back from Kharkiv, and all these events took place within the next days after the terrorist attack, as a result when Dugina was killed. And today we see that there was another terrorist attack, and another very famous war correspondent was killed. Now let's try to understand, let's try to imagine, maybe let's try to speculate a little bit what the Ukrainians want to achieve by this attack. Furthermore, and it's my bad. Nobody told us that attack was done by the Ukrainian special forces. So I'm not saying that that was made by the Ukrainians, of course, but let's take a look and let's try to analyze, let's try to understand what kind of goals the Ukrainians are able to get from this situation. And the most important goal and the most important objectives that Ukrainians are able to get are coming from Bakhmut, of course. Now let's return to Bakhmut, to the Russian deployment map. As you can see, this map has been updated. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes during the day, they managed to connect the northern forces that were attacking from the Azov steel plant and the Russians who were attacking from the south, and they managed to establish some kind of connection between these forces on the eastern part of the central part of Bakhmut. Furthermore, this map is updated. The Russians developed their bridgehead from the south. They managed to develop their bridgehead in the vicinity of the stadium that located in the geographical center, and so on. Furthermore, if we take a look at the deployment map, we're gonna see that there is, according to this map, there is just one brigade left, 93rd Mechanized Brigade, inside of central Bakhmut. This map, the Russian deployment, shows that there are a lot of parts like Georgian forces, where there is somewhere in the central part some territory defense, some Ichkerian, some Chechen forces, and so on. But the deployment map shows that there is just one brigade left, and we understand, and we discussed this yesterday, and we see that the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead in the central part significantly recently. So we understand, and furthermore, if you remember, we discussed that entire central part is in the gray zone, and we understand that Ukrainians took a decision to step back from the central part of Bakhmut. And as you can see, these two situations completely, at least we are able to connect them. We are smart people, we can connect, we understand that. The killing of the very famous, very famous and very popular military blogger, war correspondent on the ground in St. Petersburg, and the Ukrainian decision to step back from Bakhmut are tightly connected, and we see that Ukrainians are trying to change their focus. They're trying to change the focus of their society, of Russians, of Ukrainians, and during this, maybe they will try to lose the central part and without unnecessary noise. So of course, from one perspective, if you're losing central part and when everybody are completely focused in this situation, this is not very good for your reputation. But now the Ukrainians can do this silently, and nobody even cares about the central part of Bakhmut, even if the Russians or the Ukrainians will publish a piece of news that the entire Bakhmut has fallen or something like this. So as you can see, the Ukrainians are able to get some benefits from this situation, and a lot of sources, a lot of maps, a lot of sources confirm that the Ukrainians have already moved most of their army from this part of Bakhmut, and the development from according to the Russian sources as well. And this is about the situation about the Bakhmut. The Russian sources, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, reported that as a result of clashes on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 220 soldiers, 13 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. Furthermore, most of the losses are coming from Avdiivka as well, because these numbers that I just told you don't include the numbers of losses of Ukrainians in Bakhmut, in the vicinity of Bakhmut. These losses are mainly concerns to the rest of the Donbas front line. Furthermore, today, for example, the 53rd Mechanized Brigade that deployed in Avdiivka published a video when they were asking the help and support of their they were the 53rd Mechanized, this 59s, this one 53rd Mechanized Brigade published a video. They were asking for a help. They were saying about the very low level of support and supply of their forces in Avdiivka. This is the main forces that currently located in Avdiivka, and on their shoulders is to protect Avdiivka and not to allow the Russians to encircle these areas. Remember, we discussed in my previous video that the Russians managed to accumulate a very powerful and significant attack phase in the direction of Verkhnitaretsk, and of course the forces in Avdiivka understand that just a small push in the entire bridgehead will be collapsed, and not just collapsed, but the Russians will be able to achieve some kind of bridgehead that they are able to use to attack another important town by the name of Pokrovsk. So they understand everything, so they published a video trying to focus attention of the media of Ukrainian society on their position in Avdiivka, that they're having very heavy losses and so on. So we'll see. Furthermore, the Ukrainians took a decision to reinforce Avdiivka, and they deployed 116th Defense Brigade in this area, just with one purpose: to maybe they are planning to make some kind of rotation process. Maybe they want to remove some parts that were heavily damaged during the previous months. As we know, for example, 36th Mechanized Marine Corps Brigade was damaged in Avdiivka. Furthermore, 35th Brigade that currently is fighting in Marinka was damaged. 110th Brigade was damaged because of after heavy Russian attacks and so on. So the Ukrainians are trying to solve the issue, but as you can see, they are not able to bring here some mechanized brigades or modern brigades with a modern Western weapon. The only thing they can do is to bring more manpower in the face of one of defense brigades and so on, with very low quality of trainings and so on. Furthermore, don't forget that the Russians use the guided bombs in this area in significant numbers, and the Russian sources are saying, by the way, they published this information today. This piece of information today, they're saying that the Russians are able to produce up to 100 guided bombs per day. So they have a very powerful, very big warehouse, very big stocks of this type of weapon, and they have already created weapon during the previous years, so since the Soviet Union and so on. And to develop and upgrade them to guided bombs is not a very big deal. And they're able to produce 100 bombs per day, and of course this can be this simple type of weapon, and this is a very simple type of weapon because guided bomb is much more cheaper than in comparison with the rockets, Kinjal or Jagger or like other type of missiles and so on, Caliber, and they're much more cheaper, and the Russians can attack targets before 40 kilometers to the Ukrainian positions, and this is a very perfect solution. And this special operation, this is very cheap. They have already created since the Soviet Union time maybe millions of such type of bombs, and to upgrade these bombs they can do this 100 per day. So it's a very big number. As we remember, the Russians, when they attack Ukraine, they usually, at least at the past period of times, they were using up to 100 missiles per one attack, and that this is very expensive. Every single missile costs a lot of money. Furthermore, the drones like Gerань or Shahed Iranian is much more expensive than these bombs that the Russians are able to use. So they're trying to find a very cheap and massive solution, and as we see, the Russians have already found this solution. I'm not sure that the Western countries are able to provide and support Ukraine with their own guided bombs in the same number, with the same numbers like 100 per day. I'm not sure, and the reason is that first of all, the Ukrainians need to have their own a lot of air forces for these purposes, because and from the Russians' perspective, they have a lot of very powerful air defense system, and if you want to use the air bombs, first of all, you need to raise your air forces very high to the sky. So there are a lot of things that you need to solve before using this type of weapon. So we'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not. Furthermore, today we discussed that the previous video that the Ukrainians made some kind of counteroffensive operation in the vicinity of Wagner, trying to push the Russians back and, let's say, to restore the level of the safety of the roads that connects Avdiivka with the mainland. We can find this update on the Institute of Study of War map. Very small progress, and I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians managed to hold this territory or not. Maybe the Russians have already pushed the Ukrainians back, but at least this piece of information we got this morning. Okay. Now let's move further, and let's discuss the other front lines. Let's discuss the other situation on the ground and other front lines. The Ukrainians made some kind of a small counter-offensive operation in the central part of Marinka, trying to push the Russians back on the, let's say, east side of the central street. As a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost 10 soldiers, and they didn't reach any success during that operation. That attack was repulsed. When talking about Ugledar area, the Ukrainians made a few attacks in direction of Nikolska, and they were sending some kind of commandos in that area. They were discovered by the Russians, and as a result of that attack, two two commandos groups were destroyed, and the Ukrainians lost something around 65 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems in this area. Very interesting updates are coming from Zaporozhye area. The Russians continue attacking Orekhov, continue attacking Gulay Pole. 1 radar was destroyed in this area, and so on. But this is not the most important. We saw this picture yesterday, the day before yesterday, months ago, and so on. But the thing is that today I found a very interesting. My team helped me, and they provided me a very interesting map, and let's discuss this map. And this is some kind of fortifications map. So these red dots is the fortification line that the Russians managed to establish since the beginning of special military operation. As we see, there are very powerful defense line in the north, and they're showing some different types of defense line: trenches, some kind of barriers on the ground, some minefields, and so on. Now we are moving to the territory of Ukraine, and the line goes from the border of Russia through Svatovo to Severodonetsk, and this line ends somewhere at Gorlovka. As we can see, there are no trenches from the Russian side in the vicinity of Bakhmut because there are very heavy clashes, and I believe that as soon as the Russians are able to push the Ukrainians, they will develop their defense line in Bakhmut as well. And now we're moving to, let's pass by Gorlovka Donetsk. As you can see, there are not much fortifications because the Russians are using these towns as the main fortification area. And now we're moving to Zaporozhye. As you can see, there are a significant number of red dots saying that the Russians have already prepared a lot of lines of fortifications in Zaporozhye area. This is the first line that goes from Vasilievka to Pologi. As you can see, this is the first line, and as you can see, the Russians are pretty ready. They're well prepared. At least this map shows that they're very prepared to this. Then we can see the second line of the defense that goes a little bit to the south through Dniproprudovo, Mikhailovka, Tokmak. As you can see, Tokmak is completely encircled by the fence line, and from Tokmak again to Pologi. This is the second line, and then we see some kind of barriers in the vicinity of Melitopol, and almost every single town from Ukrainian position to the Black Sea or Azov Sea is prepared to the defense line, and the Russians continued building more and more trenches. But the most important piece of information that we can get from this map is the defense line, let's say from Pologi to Ugledar. As you can see, the level of the red dots is much lower in comparison with Zaporozhye. I'm talking about the area, let's say, from Pologi to Volnovakha and to Ugledar. And to tell the truth, if you take a look at this map, there are no trenches at all, just a few dots and so on. And if we return back to the Western sources map, just for better understanding, this is Pologi, and this is Ugledar. This area, according to this map, let's create a line, doesn't have almost any type of defense. So one more time, let's return back, just a few dots. And for example, when talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, this one, let's return back, this small salient from the Russian side, this salient doesn't have any defense at all, according to the fortification map. So as you can see, this is the territory that you see right now, right in front of your screens, is under Russian control, but there are just a few dots on the south. So this area is less fortified. And furthermore, this situation, this piece of information completely corresponds with information on the ground. We know that if we will try to increase the, let's say, the level of icons for entire months, we see that there are a lot of clashes, there are a lot of icons exactly in this area, and most of them are from the Ukrainian side. So we see that maybe the Russians are trying not to force, but they're like trying to ask the Ukrainians, if you want to attack, please attack us in this direction. So, and we see that there are a lot of things that happens here. There are a lot of, for example, at the same place, as you can see near the Velika Novoselov, near the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, according to the Russian sources, at least 4 helicopters were shot down. There are a lot of artillery systems that were destroyed, a lot of radars. So the Ukrainians also understand that this side of Russian area is the weakest part of Russian defense line. Exactly from Pologi to Ugledar to Donetsk. So this line where we can find the forces of Ugledar forces and so on. So this area. And of course we see that I don't know why the Russians are not increasing the power and defense level of this area. Maybe they're trying to force the Ukrainians to attack in this direction, and I don't know, but this piece of information are telling me that if the Ukrainians are going to start greatest counteroffensive operation, maybe they will do this exactly in this area, because I don't think that to attack Zaporozhye from the north in direction of Melitopol is a very good idea, because according to this map, this is a suicide operation. Because if we compare, let's say, the south of Ukraine, Russia, that is currently under Russian control, this is the most fortified area in the entire special military operation. As you can see, there are no such a place where we can find the level of such fortifications anywhere. And I'm not sure that Ukrainians even have such a level of fortifications. And from the other side, we understand that according to many sources, the Ukrainians have already accumulated significant forces in this area, and the only possible solution for them is to attack in direction of Mariupol, because to attack this fortification is suicide option. I'm not sure that Ukrainians want this. Nobody wants this. They want to have success. So we'll see. At least I believe that in April we are going to find the answers to these questions, but now let's continue with the situation on the ground. Let's talk about the Kupiansk and Liman front line as well. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians made a few small counteroffensive operation. 6 commandos were discovered in the Kupiansk front line, and as a result of artillery fire against those commandos groups, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. Furthermore, the Russian sources are saying that these days the Ukrainians have been activated in this area, and they're sending endless convoys and railroad machines to this area with tanks, with artillery systems, with a significant number of armored vehicles. The Ukrainians were planning to start something in this area the last week, but the weather, the quality of the ground and the weather became worse and worse. But this week everything is going to be restored and the weather is going to be fine. I'm not sure that Ukrainians are going to do something within this week, because the ground needs at least 1 or 2 weeks before the quality of the ground become very nice, and after that the Ukrainians will be able to start their offensive operation or in Kupiansk or Liman frontline or somewhere else. And I believe that in a week or in a 2 we are going to see another activation on other front lines of the Ukrainian special military operation as well. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.